The Seattle Seahawks can't afford another loss this season if they want to keep their playoff hopes alive this week against a Chicago Bears team in free fall on a massive losing streak, but feeling like maybe this is their best chance to still get one more win this season. A lot to go through on today's Crossover Thursday, Locked On Bears, Crossover Wednesday, Locked On Bears, Locked On Seahawks podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into our crossover podcast, Locked On Bears, Locked On Seahawks. I'm Lauren Cox from Locked On Bears, alongside Corbin Smith from Locked On Seahawks, here to get you ready for a Thursday night matchup between Chicago and Seattle. Thanks for making Locked On Bears or Locked On Seahawks your first listen today. We're both part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Our Crossover Thursday podcast is always brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Corbin, these two teams are in very, very different positions right now. The Seahawks on a short losing streak of their own, but still fighting, holding on to playoff hopes. I know it's a little bit out of their control now. They still have to win every game, but they need a little bit help as well. Do you get a sense that, I don't know, is this team still, holding on to every last hope of getting in the playoffs, or is there some doubt starting to sort of creep in?
I think that the building still has positive vibes. I mean, they had every opportunity to beat the Vikings yesterday, and you can look at it from two perspectives. You can say, well, we slipped up and we weren't able to get it done. We now don't control our own destiny. But also, hey, we were in position to beat a team that was 12-2 coming in here. And we had opportunities. We were down 10 and we fought back and had the lead at one point in the fourth quarter. So, no, I don't think that they've reached a point where they feel hopeless. But obviously, it's a tough situation now where you're going to need some help, whether it's the Arizona Cardinals beating the Rams on Sunday or a number of teams that you beat earlier in the season, winning games here down the stretch to improve your strength of victory percentage. Right now, the Rams have a big advantage there. So right now, a lot of things are working against them because they weren't able to win one of these last two games, but they still have some room to be able to get in the postseason. There's still a lot to play for going into this game on Thursday night.
Why do you think they haven't been able to maintain that level of consistency? Like, they've done so well in their divisional games, but they play two playoff caliber teams in the Packers and Vikings and just can't get over the hump that way. What's the obstacle in the way there?
I think there's two things that you can look at. One, they've gotten off to slow starts in both games, particularly the Packers game, falling behind 14-0 in a blink of an eye. And then the defense played a lot better the rest of the game. The offense, then you lose Geno Smith for most of the second half. They had Sam Howell in. They couldn't get much traction at all on offense. So there were some circumstances that made that game. I think that game is a really close one if Geno Smith does not get hurt, because Seattle's defense played a lot better and the offense was starting to find a groove before Smith went out in that game. And then yesterday you saw them fall behind 7-0, 17-7. So they just continue to hurt themselves early in games. And I think the other issue, and this has become such a broken record in the Pacific Northwest, I know some Seahawks fans are tired of hearing about it, but you can't throw the ball 80% of the time in games in the NFL and win consistently. Like, that's just not how it works. You've got to have some balance on offense. And coordinator Ryan Grubb has just been hitting his head on the wall trying to throw the football as much as possible. They did it again yesterday down the stretch. And not having that balance, I think, has cost them several games this year.
Well, the Bears defense went from being one of the better run defenses to one of the worst in the last handful of weeks. So he won't have any excuses not to run the ball against this group.
He'll find one. It looks like.
Yeah, that's there's some similarities between this team in terms of slow starts and abandoning the running game. But the Bears have seen quite a bit of that this season. But I guess defensively for the Seahawks, I know they've had some ups and downs throughout this process. Again, maybe some slow starts on that side of the ball as well. Like, how would you sort of rate the Mike McDonald experience so far as trying to implement that system in 1 year and trying to turn over some of the talent there, but it takes time to really, sink into what he wants to do fully.
Yeah, I would give him a solid B for this season in terms of what he's been able to do with the defense. They got off to a start that was questionable. They had several games in the middle of the year. They lost 4 out of 5 at one point. And it seemed like the season was just falling apart there. And then they won 4 games in a row and got themselves back into first place in the NFC West. And the big reason they did that, in that 4-game winning streak, including 2 wins over the Cardinals, they gave up under 14 points per game in those 4 games. Their defense was firing on all cylinders. The addition of Ernest Jones at linebacker has been an absolute game changer for them. Tyrese Knight's been a really solid rookie at linebacker. Last couple of weeks, those two have not played quite as well in the middle of the defense. They've given up more explosives. They've had more crucial back-breaking penalties. So some of the stuff that was hurting them earlier in the season has kind of resurfaced a little bit. But they've still had their moments the last 2 weeks where the defense has kept them in the game. They just haven't been able to create the turnovers the way that they were during that 4-game winning streak. So I think that McDonald has been able to make some adjustments to his personnel and the way that he's utilizing the players he has that has helped this defense be a lot better in the second half of the season. But there are still some areas that they're going to have to improve moving forward.
What about Geno Smith in the transition here? I mean, you and I talked earlier this year about Shane Waldron leaving Seattle and coming to Chicago, and we saw how that worked out for the Bears here. But with Geno, like, he's obviously still playing at a really high level. Maybe the interceptions are a little bit higher than we would have thought from him this season, but they've been passing the ball so much. He's just got a lot of volume to throw at here. I guess how impressed have you been with him? And I guess what's your confidence level at least in the passing game at this stage of the season?
Yeah, I'm not in the same zip code as a lot of Seahawks fans are upset about the quarterback situation. And I understand the high interception total and the fact that a lot of those have happened in the red zone. There have been some throws that obviously Geno Smith would want back. But I think that a lot of the circumstances have played into that, not having a run game consistently to complement him. You're playing behind one of the worst offensive lines in the entire NFL. They've had to rotate a bunch of guys in and out of the lineup. They finally have a little bit of continuity there, and you've seen some improvements in recent weeks, other than the pass pro in the Packers game was abysmal. But this has been a group where Geno Smith has masked a lot of those troubles with his ability to move the pocket and his arm talent, but he has made some mistakes with the football. And again, when you're throwing 75+% of the time and you're putting all that weight on your quarterback, there's going to be some times he's going to try to play hero ball because he has to. And I think that has happened more than Geno Smith would like this season. It's impacted the numbers, and not having the run game to complement him in the red zone, I also think has helped contribute to that really high interception total. So I still have a lot of confidence in him, and I think he's done really well considering the circumstances. Fans, a lot of them don't necessarily agree with that narrative.
Sure. Well, it sounds to me like this Bears game could be a lot of what the doctor ordered here, with how badly the Bears are playing on defense and some of the areas maybe on offense that will line up nicely with what Seattle wants to do on that side of the ball. So we'll turn our attention to the Bears side of the matchup, and then we'll get into some keys to victory and also the top matchups to watch as we continue our crossover podcast, Locked On Bears, Locked On Seahawks. This crossover podcast, Locked On Bears, Locked On Seahawks, is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, and they're really going to make it worth your while, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So you could place a $5 bet on, say, this Bears-Seahawks game on Thursday night, where the Bears are 3.5-point home underdogs. Seahawks favored by 3.5 points on the road. The money line is Seahawks -188 and the Bears +158. And the over-under is set at 43.5 points. A $5 bet on those or any of your favorite sports on FanDuel. They've got the NBA, college sports, the bowl games, college football playoff, hockey, soccer, tennis, boxing, all the combat sports, you name it, they've got it at FanDuel. There's so many different ways for you to pick up a W. It's really just adds that much more to your sports experience. So to get your $250 in bonus bets with your first winning $5 bet, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, continuing our crossover Locked On Bears, Locked On Seahawks podcast. Corbin, this Bears team is on a 9-game losing streak, and it's hard to come into any game on a 9-game losing streak and say, this is going to be the one that they win. But this schedule has had Packers, Lions, Vikings twice in the last 3 weeks, or the last 6 weeks here. And so I think Bears fans have circled the Seahawks on this one, not as a bad team, but just the only team that doesn't have double-digit wins on their schedule right now that's left for them to try and get some kind of win. But I don't know that a lot of Bears fans are saying, yes, this will be an easy win. It's just like your best hope in an otherwise really lost season.
And look, the Seahawks team lost to the Giants earlier this year. So, I mean, they've got some losses that you can look back on like, I'm going to miss the playoffs because of that. So this has been a team that's had some weeks that they have dropped the ball. The last 2 weeks, they obviously were playing really good football teams in the Packers and the Vikings. But from a Bears perspective, look, I've watched a fair amount of Chicago's games this year. They've actually had quite a few games that have been in front of national audience. Remember that Thanksgiving debacle that happened that ultimately led to the coaching change, and then Shane Waldron getting ousted earlier than that, former Seahawks offensive coordinator. What have you seen from Caleb Williams throughout this entire process? Because this is about the last thing you want when you have a number 1 overall pick come in that's a quarterback. And not only do you have to fire your offensive coordinator, but you have to turn around and fire your head coach midway through the season. That can create a really difficult situation for a young quarterback that can stunt their development. But it seems like he has been making more plays more consistently here in the last few weeks, even in all these defeats.
Yeah, that's pretty spot on. You know, this was supposed to be a really good landing spot for Caleb with talented receivers and running backs and, weapons all over the offense, and presumably a really good defense run by Matt Eberflus. And you handpick Shane Waldron to try and be the coordinator to develop everything. It was supposed to be great. They came out a little bit flat early on, but there was some room for patience, right? Okay, rookie quarterback, first handful of games, it's not going to be a well-oiled machine. Then they play an injured Rams team and then a couple of bad Panthers and Jaguars teams, and everything's taken off. They get to 4-2 entering their bye week, and it's like, all right, the whole plan is working, and they haven't won a game since. That was October 13th. That was the last time they won a football game this season, and that's when all the firings happened. I think along the way, you've kind of seen some ups and downs from Caleb, where they'll put a lot on his plate, and sometimes he's able to handle it all and stay on top of everything, and other times he's thinking a little bit too much out there. He's a little tentative and just won't pull the trigger on stuff because he's trying to be the hero. He's trying to make plays. He's trying to do something to end this losing streak, and it just won't quite happen. So it's been some stretches of ups and downs, but this last game against the Lions on Sunday felt like a nice bounce back in a way that, like, okay, maybe they haven't completely broken him just yet, and that he can still get back to being sort of the fast and loose playmaking quarterback that they thought they were getting with the number 1 overall pick, instead of someone that felt like for a while they were trying to cram into a box and make him, quick rhythm pocket quarterback. And that's not really utilizing his strengths properly.
Yeah, and I look at this football team. We were talking about it on our show on Monday, first looking at Chicago, that the receivers, the tight ends, the running backs that this team has, that's why there was optimism. I mean, I thought Chicago might be a team that could go out and win 8-9 games, maybe even double digits if everything fell in place this year, because I loved the weapons that they had for Caleb Williams. And it wasn't necessarily that I was sold on Williams being the best quarterback. I liked Jaden Daniels coming into this draft, and Williams was, somebody I thought was going to be good. But nonetheless, I thought this was a really good landing spot for him. But with all those weapons, it feels like we're kind of talking about similar teams in the sense that the offensive line has continued to be a major issue for the Chicago Bears. And Seattle Seahawks fans know how this is. You can have all the weapons in the world, but it doesn't matter if your offensive line is not keeping the quarterback clean and can't open up holes for the running game.
Yeah, the offensive line has definitely been the biggest issue for this offense. I will say, like, the weapons have underwhelmed a little bit at times, and some of that's just timing and structure stuff, but they're not immune from criticism here with some attention to detail stuff and not being exactly where they need to be at times. But the offensive line has definitely been the biggest derailment here. Against the Lions on Sunday, their left tackle Braxton Jones broke his ankle. He's out for the rest of the year. So we may see rookie third-round pick Karan Amagaji get another shot there, but he was pretty bad when he had to fill in earlier this season. So maybe they stick with backup Larry Borum. But either way, that's going to be a big hole there. Their left guard, Tevin Jenkins, is on the injury report again and has a history of this. So it could be backups at left tackle and left guard. And then your weakest spot's really been center all season with Coleman Shelton coming over from the Rams. Just hasn't been nearly consistent enough on the interior. Some ups and downs in there, but just the weakness has always been up front there. All they can really hold on to is Darnell Wright at right tackle. In his second year has been, making good progress. He's far from elite, but just, where you want him to be for a top 10 pick in his second season, making some steady growth there. But across the board up front, it's been a tough group. And then Caleb has held on to the ball too long. I mean, he's made their life more difficult sometimes as well. Like sometimes he does a great job of escaping the pocket, and somehow you have no idea how he got out of that sack, and he makes you look like a hero for it. But there's other times when like the internal clock needs to go a little bit faster. And I think he's waiting for that last receiver to open up because he wants to make the big play, but he's got to just kind of get rid of the ball or get out of the pocket or do something. And that's what we've wanted to see speed up. We saw that speed up a little bit last week against the Lions. So is he turning a corner there, or was that just one game plan against one team that worked well? And we're eager to see how that approach looks in Seattle, or against Seattle, in Chicago, I should say.
And on the defensive side of the ball, you and I were talking about this before we recorded, but this was a Bears defense that was near the top of the league in run defense for a good chunk of this season. And then it feels like since Eberflus got fired, that kind of was the pivotal moment where suddenly everything is just kind of fallen apart here the last 3 or 4 weeks. And Seahawks fans are saying, well, wait a second, a defense that we can run against, maybe this will be enough for Ryan Grubb. I don't know if it'll be enough for Ryan Grubb to do that, but what have you seen on that side of the ball? Because it has been one of the more stark differences from the first 2 months to the last month that you'll see in the NFL.
Yeah, that's a group that it feels like right now some players are playing with a ton of effort and leaving everything out on the field, and some players have realized that's a 4-win football team that's out of the playoffs and maybe are not as interested in putting everything out on the field, right? Like it's not a talent issue on that group. They got a couple injuries here and there. You know, one of their safeties, Jaquan Brisker's been out for a while. Their defensive line, the defensive tackles have been banged up. We'll see if Jervon Dexter comes back there. But like they've got players that we've seen play at a high level. Montez Sweat, Kevin Byard, Tremaine Edmonds, Jalen Johnson. But not all those guys are playing up to the level that we expect them to play and that we've seen them play in Chicago and in previous seasons before. So like, I think Jalen Johnson is still playing at a really high level. Kyler Gordon in the slot is still playing really well. And TJ Edwards at linebacker, like those 3 guys are like shining examples of what you want, even in the tail end of a lost season. But a lot of other guys in that back end just aren't as interested in being as aggressive and physical as maybe they were earlier this season. We've seen, bad angles from DBs coming downhill and linebackers that want to fight over blocks as opposed to going through them as much. And then the D-line has been so injured that they're just not really getting a consistent enough pass rush. They need somebody to step up every single week, and occasionally they'll get a little something, a flash from former Seahawk Darrell Taylor has had a couple nice plays this season, but it's not every week. And if they don't have that guy step up, then they don't have much of a pass rush.
Yeah, that was leading into my last question about the defense, because if the run defense isn't playing great, that obviously is always a problem. Although Seattle has not always played into that when teams have the weakness defending the run. But what have you seen defensively? Is there anything that they can lean their hat on here, even as the season has gotten away from them? With the run defense being worse, is there anything they can still lean their hat on that maybe has provided maybe a sliver of hope coming into this game against Seattle's offense?
Yeah, not much, but they do still find ways to give themselves we'll say opportunities for turnovers. They haven't been as great of like holding on to the interception or like recovering the forced fumble, but they've had plays where the ball is up for grabs, and their defensive backfield in particular, they have a knack for being in the right place at the right time and saying, okay, they can be aggressive and jump around every once in a while when they really see it, when the play unfolds in front of them. There is a pure talent level to that, especially again with guys like Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon still playing at a really high level. Like they're gonna be aggressive at times, and if they can get that extra possession there, that goes a long way. And they've still been pretty good at bucking down in the red zone and trying, holding you to field goals instead of touchdowns, at least at first. That'll break over the course of the game. But, like last week against the Lions, Bears had 2 fumbles in the first quarter that put the Lions in plus territory and held them to field goals on both drives. Like they're pretty good at stopping the bleeding when it's a disaster, but you wear them down and then you'll get lots and lots of chunk plays to march your way downfield and try and finish those plays with touchdowns. I know the Seahawks offense has had some red zone issues. I have a feeling that's going to be one of the really key matchups here that we'll get into as we continue our crossover podcast, Locked On Bears, Locked On Seahawks, here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Our crossover podcast today is brought to you by PrizePicks, the better way to play daily fantasy sports. If you love watching the game, you're going to love PrizePicks. It's the easiest and most exciting way for daily fantasy. Whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports, PrizePicks can make your holidays bigger and brighter. Because now you can win up to 1,000 times your money on PrizePicks. That's right, 4 digits, 1,000 times your money. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away $300+ million in rewards during what they're calling Picksmas, and they're offering 2 free picks in December. And when your PrizePicks hit, they make it super easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. So say you want to make a couple picks on this Bears Seahawks game coming up here. You can pick, say, DJ Moore rushing and receiving touchdowns at 0.5, or Roshan Johnson, or Jackson Smith-Njigba, DK Metcalf, you name it. With PrizePicks, they set a projection for your player, and you pick more or less, and that's how you get up to 1,000 times your money. Download the PrizePicks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. Whether that $5 lineup hits or not, that's okay. You're getting that $50 instantly when you play just $5 at PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, Lauren Cox from Locked On Bears here with Corbin Smith from Locked On Seahawks for our crossover podcast. Again, our crossovers are brought to you by PrizePicks. Download that app and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play 5. Corbin, when you think about some of the big matchups going into this game, obviously, I think the red zone is going to be a really key area where I think both of these offenses have stalled a bit this season, but the Bears defense has been pretty good at keeping teams out of the end zone, at least for some of the game, before they get worn down by the third and fourth quarter and start giving up some of the bigger plays there. But I don't know, do you see the Seahawks actually finally going to the running game consistently this one, or is the hope from Seattle that, hey, the passing game is just going to have to get it done again?
Look, at this point, I'm just not overly confident that we are going to see Ryan Grubb turn a new leaf. I mean, a couple weeks ago against Arizona, he kind of did. And that made me think they finally turned the corner from a play calling's perspective. But then the last 2 weeks, it's been reverting back to, well, I don't trust my run game, or I just think that we have the pieces to be able to sling it all over the place. And that has not yielded the results consistently to be able to win those last couple games. As far as this matchup is concerned, you should be emphasizing the run game. The issue they're going to have is on this short break, Ken Walker suffers an ankle injury late in the game yesterday. I'd be stunned if Ken Walker's playing in this game. Zach Charbonnet is dealing with an elbow issue. He had an oblique injury last week, so he's a little banged up. It's really who's going to be toting the rock if you are going to try to emphasize that. Is Kenny McIntosh going to take on a bigger role? Do you sign George Halani to the roster for Thursday? I mean, they've got some question marks there. I'm just going to keep hammering home the red zone, though. I mean, this has been a Bears team that's had some issues, as you mentioned, in that regard. Seattle's been on the flip side where they have been very poor in the red zone, at least finishing drives of touchdowns. In fact, they've had I believe from week 11 to week 15, they had a 30% turnover rate when they were in the red zone. It has been a real struggle. Not all of those have been on Geno Smith, in my opinion, but most of them have been where there's been some poor decisions. They've got to finish. And the good thing is this Vikings game, the only 2 times they got in the red zone, they scored touchdowns on both of them. So you're seeing improvement there. Can they transition that to this game to win on the road in Chicago? They are going to have to get to the red zone frequently, and you've got to finish drives. And on the defensive side of the ball, you can't let Caleb Williams hold onto the ball 10, 11 seconds and run all over the place. They've got to keep him corralled and force him to be more of a pocket passer, which they were able to do with Kyler Murray in their 2 matchups against the Cardinals. If you can do that with Williams and not let him play that sandlot football, extend a bunch of plays, then I think the Seahawks have a much better chance to go into Chicago and get this done and get that 9th win of the season.
I'm really curious to see the matchup on the interior there between like a really struggling Seattle Seahawks interior offensive line and a really struggling Chicago Bears interior defensive line. And if Javon Dexter's healthy enough to play, that might sway things a little bit. But the part of the big problem for the Bears run defense in recent weeks is that, their nose tackle Andrew Billings is on IR and their starting 3 technique Dexter has been out with injury. And so they've had 2 backups in there. And whenever they try and stop the run, like the middle of the line of scrimmage is being pushed 3, 4, 5 yards downfield. So then the linebackers have nowhere to run to try and stop the run. So you're making tackles for 5, 6, 7, 8 yards every time. And that's a nice, easy running game on the other end. But, is the Seattle Seahawks interior offensive line bad enough that these Bears backups find a way to hold a little bit more stout, or vice versa? Are these Bears backup defensive tackles bad enough that all of a sudden the Seattle Seahawks interior offensive line looks strong and sturdy, and they're going to set the tone and move the line of scrimmage that way? Like that's going to be fun to see, the movable object against the stoppable force.
There's a lot of something's got to give matchups here when you're looking at these two teams, just because I think it's hard to look at clear advantages from that standpoint, because the weakness for one team doesn't necessarily play into the weakness for the other one, and that's the most prominent example of that.
Yeah, I think on the flip side, like both of these teams, you look at like the secondaries versus the receivers, right? Like we know Seattle's got plenty of talent at wide receiver, but that's where the Bears feel strongest on their defense, on defense, right? The defensive backfield is where they really trust what guys like Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon and company can do. And I think on the other end, between Tyreek Woolen and Devin Witherspoon and Julian Love and stuff, like I don't think the Seahawks are backing down with their secondary either, saying, yeah, we'll cover DJ Moore, we'll cover Keenan Allen, we'll cover Roma Dunze. Like, give us your best shot on that side of the ball, and feel like their punches. These teams are surprisingly similar similar in terms of their structure and where they're good and bad, given how different their seasons have gone up to this point.
And I do think the one most notable thing, and this kind of fits in with Caleb Williams, because one thing they were able to do with Kyler Murray both games they played is they were able to get a lot of interior pressure with their front line. Leonard Williams is playing an all-pro this year. Jaron Reed's coming off a really good game against Minnesota. Byron Murphy II has made some plays. I mean, that is maybe the one area that you can circle right now. Like, the Bears interior line hasn't played well. They've got injuries. Seattle's got all these really good pieces in the defensive interior, and they were able to get some pressure on Sam Darnold yesterday and get 3 sacks. So that might end up being the difference maker when it comes to corralling Caleb Williams. If you're able to get that interior pressure that either puts him in a spot where he's rushing throws, or then he's trying to scramble and your outside guys have him contained, there's nowhere to go. That type of bottle up approach could be the one major advantage Seattle has in this game.
So I think we both think Seattle's going to win this game. I think everybody, you're not going to see a lot of people picking the Bears, at least nationally here. So what do you think? You mentioned the Seahawks losing to the Giants earlier this season. Like they have a propensity sometimes to have a potential stinker here. So like, what would that look like? Like, I think we kind of know what a Bears upset win would look like, right? Caleb Williams plays well. They get the running game going. Seattle can't finish drives with touchdowns. Like, we kind of have a sense of what that might look like. But what would it look like for Seattle if they kind of, stink it up a little bit and keep regressing in this way?
Well, there would be two things that you would see, and they would be common chronic issues they've had all year. Offense, the inability to finish drives and not having a run game. Too much emphasis on the passing game and allowing the Bears to get pressure on Geno Smith. That's been the recipe for disaster. It happened in that Giants game. And then on the defensive side of the ball, it's self-inflicted wounds. It's penalties. It's busted coverages. The run defense has been better, but they had some rough patches this year defending the run. But to me, it is about execution and self-inflicted mistakes. So you can look at it that way on both sides of the ball. But I think on offense, too much passing and not being able to have that balance on offense, not finishing drives, and then defensively just getting in their own way. And even yesterday we saw that against the Vikings. They had 11 penalties, a number of those on defense that extended drives that turned into touchdowns for Minnesota. So that would be the concern. I guess if you're looking for a good reason to be excited in this game, Seattle's been so good on the road this year. They've finished 3-6 at Lumen Field. Like, that's unheard of, a losing record like that in Seattle. But they've only lost one road game the entire season. They've been really good on the road. Can you carry that over to a cold weather game in Chicago? That's going to be the ultimate question here.
Well, and on the other side, I think a Seahawks win and a Bears loss looks like some of the same things we've been seeing. Like much like you, the same story for the same Bears team, that they'll start super slow. They won't score much at all in the first half. Maybe the final 2-minute drive, they get into some no huddle and get into rhythm and score. But the Bears defense holds you to field goals for the first few scoring drives, and then the touchdowns start coming. They're down 24-6 at halftime, and Caleb tries to climb back in the fourth quarter and maybe puts a little bit of fear into your heart for the Seahawks, but still end up Seattle cruises to a victory at the end. And that's kind of how I foresee this game going in general, until the Bears find a way to prove us wrong and on a 9-game losing streak I don't know that this week all of a sudden it's just going to be the one where they play like a different football team on a short week. Yeah, I don't think so. But hey, that's going to do it for our crossover podcast, Locked On Bears and Locked On Seahawks. Thanks everyone for tuning in and making Locked On Bears or Locked On Seahawks your first listen today and hopefully every single day. Hit the subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts or on the YouTube channels. That way you're keeping up with all of our videos as well. I know Corbin will be going live after the Seahawks game on Thursday night, and we'll be keeping your schedule rolling with fresh Locked On Bears podcasts for you every single morning. So keep coming back, keep making us your first listen and tuning in every day. And we will talk to you again either tomorrow or after the game or the next time we see you. Have a happy holidays.